I've been working on a small lap robe for donation. Um, it's an old pattern. It's been done many ways. Normally this pattern is done with a foundation piece of fabric, but I really love paper piecing, and so I have converted it to paper piecing. What we're trying to make is something that looks like this. Uh, it has a white stripe down the middle, and then we've paper pieced strings, that is, narrow strips of fabric on either side. To start it, I grabbed my scrap, the stuff that goes into the wastebasket normally, and simply made a square. I have this little quilter square and I like it. Once that was made, I used a ruler, marked the diagonals, and then marked 3/4 of an inch on either side of the diagonal. Now I have it set up to paper piece. I simply have 1.5-inch strips of my white fabric that go down the middle, and I found that it works best if I take the time to put a couple of pins here. I pin it not to the middle but kind of to the side because I'm going to stitch on this side. Now, I want my strings of varying widths. They obviously need to be long enough to go from one side to the other. As you can see in this one, I have 4 strings on either side, at least 3 strings. Anything less than 3, you don't get the pattern to develop well. Anyway, this is the way we go. 1 string down this side, line it up, and just simply sew. Notice, I have my sewing machine set up with a fairly short stitch pattern. I want it to perforate this paper sufficiently enough so that it's easy to tear it away later. So I will stitch this. Open it up, pin it back, and now I need to cut off the excess, mostly just to keep it out of my way. Get rid of the white fabric, get rid of this little piece. This little piece is big enough that it might actually work for a corner here, like a corner like that. Anyway, so I'm going to put the one on the other side, and here's one that I've done. Once I have it at this point, I'll press them. I have several of them done, and I will press all these and be right back. Once you have the first 2 strings and the middle done, continue adding strings in pairs until you have completely covered your paper. There's one more pair, and I'll be right back. I have completely covered my paper, and it looks like that. Before I trim the excess off, I want to reinforce the edges. Because all of these pieces are on the diagonal or bias of the fabric, they will have a lot of stretch to them. And when I sew it together, I don't want to be fighting that stretch. So what I want to do is make a line of stitching between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch from the inside of my paper piece. That will just stabilize it. I don't want it too close, or the piece that I tear off will be too small, and I don't want it to be too far over, or when I sew it together I will see that seam. So I'm just going to take it and go round around it. There, we're finished. Now, the next job is to trim the excess fabric off. You can use a rotary cutter and a ruler to do this, but I find it's almost just as easy to take my scissors and just simply trim it. Anyway, I've got several of these to do, and I will be back. I've finished removing the paper backs from all of my other blogs. These are my last few here. It's a very simple task. You just pull a little bit, and that stitch line that you perforated with your sewing needle should just break, and these should easily come off. I usually sit quietly and put something on and go at it, but they come off easily. Now, I told you not to make this outside seam too thin or too thick, and that's the reason. If you make it too thin, this little piece is hard to get off. If you make it just right, it just slips right off. Anyway, I've got 2 more to do, and then I will put my quilt together, and I'll be back. I've laid my pattern out, and as you can see, it's a very interesting pattern. I will now sew it together and strip it with a 1.5 inch border, followed by a 2.5 inch border to get my 40-inch quilt. My little quilt is all finished and quilted, and you can see the 1-inch border here and a 2-inch border there, and then I used a yellow for the binding. The backing is simple, just a piece of fabric, and I quilted it, as you can see, with a lot of squares, basically following the seam lines and some diagonals. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. I have other videos that show you how to do the bindings and so forth, so I'm not going to do that on this video. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe.